Hello and welcome everyone. This is Minu at AngloLink. In this two-part lesson, we're going to look at indirect statements and indirect questions. In part 1, I'm going to explain the changes that you must make to statements when you report them. These include changes to pronouns, tenses, and time markers. In part 2, we'll look at indirect questions and some specific cases. We will finish each part with a series of exercises to deepen your understanding. By the end of the two lessons, you will have a good grasp of indirect speech patterns in English. So when you're ready, let's start with part 1.
Indirect or reported speech. Part 1. Statements. When we want to repeat what someone else has said, we usually use a special formulation called indirect or reported speech. Let's look at an example. John said, "I often come here." This is direct speech. We've put John's exact words in speech marks. Now, in answer to the question, "What did John say?" we must switch to indirect speech. John said he often came here, or John said that he often came here. Let's compare the direct and indirect statements. Direct statement, John said, "I often come here." Indirect statement, John said that he often came here. So what has changed? First of all, the pronoun has changed to indicate the person who spoke. I has changed to he. Secondly, the verb of the original sentence has changed its tense. Come has changed to came. This is because the reporting verb said is in the past. And as you can see, the two parts, the reporting verb and the reported sentence, can be connected with or without that. Note that if the reporting verb is in the present, there is no tense change. For example, John, I often come here. If the question is, what is John saying? The answer is, he is saying that he often comes here. The verb stays in the same tense, present simple. There are many reporting verbs for statements. However, the most common reporting verbs are say, tell, and explain. Be careful that with say and explain, you have a choice to specify the person or not. And if you specify the person, make sure you use the preposition to. For example, he said to her. They explained to us. With tell, you should specify the person. He told her. They told us. Let's look at how different tenses change in reported or indirect speech. Let's start with the verbs to be and modal verbs. Am and is change to was. Are changes to were. Was and were change to had been. Can changes to could. Must stays must, or it changes to had to. May changes to might. Might stays might. There is no change. Could can stay the same, or it can change to had been able to. Shall becomes should. Should stays the same. And ought to stays the same as well. All right, let's look at simple tenses. Do and does, present simple, become did, past simple. Did changes to had done. And will do changes to would do. Let's look at perfect tenses. Have or has done, present perfect, becomes had done, past perfect. Had done doesn't change. It stays past perfect, had done. Will have done changes to would have done. Let's look at continuous tenses. Present continuous, am, is, are, doing, changes to past continuous, was, were, doing. Have or has been doing, changes to had been doing. Was, were, doing, had been doing. Had been doing doesn't change. It stays as had been doing. Will be doing changes to would be doing. And finally, will have been doing changes to would have been doing. There are two other tenses to look at. One is used to, and it doesn't change. It stays used to. And finally, the be going to tense, am, is, or are going to do, changes to was, were, going to do. Right, that's all for tense changes. Now, let's look at the changes we make to time markers. Time markers sometimes need to change to keep the sense of the sentence. For example, if the original sentence is, I'll call you tomorrow, in indirect speech, you need to change that to the next day or the following day. She said she'd call me the next day, or she said she'd call me the following day. Another word to be careful with is yesterday. For example, John told her, I handed in the report yesterday. In indirect speech, yesterday changes to the day before. John told her he had handed in the report the day before. Moving on, the next word is next week, or other expressions with next, next month, next year. Next week changes to the following week. We told him, we're coming back next week. We told him we were coming back the following week. Another time marker that changes is last year, or any other time marker with last, last week, last night, etc. For example, she said, we didn't visit Lisbon last year. In indirect speech, she said they hadn't visited Lisbon the year before. And finally, the word now. They said we must leave now. In indirect speech, you can change now to then or immediately. They said they had to leave then. They said they had to leave immediately. Right, there are a few other words that you have to be careful with. The first ones are this and these. They change to that and those. For example, she said, this is the last bus. Changing into indirect speech, she said that was the last bus. Or they told us, we've chosen these books. Changing into reported speech, they told us they'd chosen those books. Moving on, here changes to there if the location has changed. For example, we've been living here for 20 years. They said they'd been living there for 20 years. And finally, a word about would like. Would like changes to want. Remember that I'd like to is a formal equivalent of I want, used only in the present tense. To report a sentence with this expression, use the verb want. For example, she said, I'd like to be a singer. She said she wanted to be a singer. Or, he said, I'd like some rice, please. In indirect speech, you should say, he said he wanted some rice. Right then, that's all for the rules to do with formulating indirect statements. Let's do some exercises. Put the following sentences into indirect speech. Example: he said, I haven't found my book yet. You now change it into indirect speech. He said he hadn't found his book yet. Right, let's get started with the exercises. Number 1. They said, we aren't ready. They said they weren't ready. Number 2. He told me, I can call you back tomorrow. He told me that he could call me back the next day. Number 3. We said, we'll stay here for a while. We said we'd stay there for a while. Number 4. Andrew said, I couldn't buy the new game. Andrew said that he hadn't been able to buy the new game. Number 5. Jane said, I may not be able to join you. Jane said she might not be able to join us. Number 6. They told me, we posted the letter yesterday. They told me they had posted the letter the day before. Number 7. He said, I used to play volleyball at school. He said he used to play volleyball at school. Number 8. I told them, if you go this way, you'll get lost. I told them if they went that way, they'd get lost. Number 9. She said, I'm going to cancel the contract. She said she was going to cancel the contract. Number 10. Bob told us, I'd like to take up swimming. Bob told us he wanted to take up swimming.